The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from a book edited by Rex Stout back in the 1940s. It's titled The Illustrious Dunderheads, and it's speeches given mostly by Republican congressmen in Congress on the floor of the House and the Senate, talking about how we should not support England or Britain in their fight against Hitler, and how Hitler's a guy we can work with and all this sort of thing. If you saw the Churchill movie, Darkest Hour, this book will ring a lot of bells for you. It's out of print. There are used copies floating around. This is a copy my father gave me as a gift years ago. So, The Illustrious Dunderheads by Rex Stout. It's a collection of speeches, as I said. The first one is by George Bender, the Republican representative from Ohio. And this is July 11, 1940. I wish to call attention to the statement made by an expert, Colonel Lindbergh. Quote, "Let us not be confused by this talk of invasion by European aircraft. The air defense of America is as simple as the attack is difficult when the true facts are faced. We are in danger of a war today not because the European people have attempted to interfere with the internal affairs of America, but because American people have attempted to interfere with the internal affairs of Europe. Regardless of which side wins the war, there is no reason, aside from our own actions, to prevent a continuation of peaceful relationships between America and the countries of Europe." Then on September 3rd, 1940, he said, "Any device at all that suits the convenience of the president." Keep in mind, FDR was president, and the Republicans didn't want to fight against Hitler because they thought it would get FDR elected for a third term as a wartime president. That was what this was all about. "Any device at all that suits the convenience of the president is used in order to get us into this war by the back door. The power of peacetime conscription in the hands of an administration that is proved by its record to have used every conceivable excuse for regimenting America, overturning all tradition, and changing our form of government is nothing but an invitation to disaster. We know that our people hate everything that Hitler stands for. We despise dictatorship in any form, but I challenge anyone to tell us the difference between executive orders issued by Roosevelt and those issued by Hitler." Republicans in 1940. But wait, there's more. This is from Hamilton Fish, Republican representative from New York State. This is June 22nd, 1940. "Colonel Lindbergh was right when he said in one of his recent speeches, 'Let us stop this hysterical chatter about calamity and invasion that has been running rife these past few days. It is not fitting to the people who built this nation. The only reason we are in danger to becoming involved in this war is because there are powerful elements in America who desire to take part in a war against Hitler.'" Then on June 22nd, 1940, he gave a speech at the House of Representatives. He says, "Let us have an end to the secret diplomacy and the secret commitments of President Roosevelt that have brought ruin and disaster to France and from which we have escaped only by a miracle, and the will of the American people expressed through Congress to keep America out of war." This was the America First movement back then. President Roosevelt alarmed the nation by his inflammatory Italian dagger thrust in the heart speech. And on August 5th, Republican Representative Hamilton Fish said, "Whom do we fear? Do we fear Hitler, who seems afraid to attack England over 20 miles of sea when he would have 3,000 miles to cross here? This is preposterous. Let us stop this fear hysteria." And then on September 3rd, he said on the floor of the House, Republican Representative Fish of New York, "Peacetime conscription in America is the direct road to Hitlerism, dictatorship, and National Socialism." See, he didn't want Roosevelt to start the draft. "If we adopt peacetime conscription, we are merely copying Nazi methods and ideology. Mr. Speaker, this Roosevelt Far Eastern policy of bluff and bluster has driven Japan into the hands of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. No one in Japan really wants war with the United States, but it's quite evident that this highly proud and militaristic nation has got tired of being threatened and slapped in the face by us. We must not let our sympathies run away with our judgment and involve us in any Asiatic war 10,000 miles away that has no connection to the defense of the American continent. We have more to fear from the war makers within our country than from our enemies without. Yeah, got more to fear from Franklin Roosevelt than from Adolf Hitler. This is from Claire Hoffman, Republican representative of Michigan. And this is from a speech that Mr. Hoffman gave September 7, 1940. Mr. Speaker, down into the hell of a war, in no sense our war, this president would plunge us to satisfy his ambition to break the American tradition that no man should be elected a third time to the presidency, and in order that he may go down in history as America's first dictator. Yes, this is Republicans speaking on the floor of the House of Representatives, calling FDR a dictator in 1940. This is 1 year after Hitler had invaded Poland. Back to the quote. He told us, in effect, that we had no national defense, that we were open to successful invasion by a foreign foe. Thus, he created fear and hysteria. As on other occasions, when he had satisfied his penchant for theatrics by shouting "fire, fire" and calling Congress in special session at a cost of $500,000, he, figuratively speaking, now tucks his tongue in his cheek and goes off on a vacation. It is to be hoped on this one he will not, as he did on a prior occasion, see a mythical submarine. Roosevelt's threat to use the sovereignty of government is the threat of a Hitler, of a Mussolini, a Stalin, to silence all opposition and all criticism. He has consistently arrayed class against class, preached envy and jealousy, the doctrine of hatred and fear, and his egotism is only equaled by his ignorance when we assume that patriotic Americans will tamely submit. The illustrious Dunderheads.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Monday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It is the day that we more or less officially, and I say more or less because, you know, some businesses are open, some aren't. Ours is, but we're here to honor Dr. King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And on the line with us today to discuss this and other issues of the day is Joe Madison, the host of the Joe Madison Show on Sirius XM, channel 126, a civil and human rights activist. Joe, welcome back to the program.
Well, good. It's good to be back. Sorry you're not here in Washington, but...
well, given the weather,
well, what I don't. Yeah,
it's been nice and sunny here in the 50s.
These people here, it gets below 30 and 2 inches of snow, and everything shuts down. But But it's always good. I'm always listening though. Almost every day at noon, especially if I'm in my car, so I'm always listening.
Thank you, Joe. You're one of the best. You are absolutely one of the best, and your program is extraordinary too on Sirius XM. What do you say, given what's happened, with Trump and just in the last couple of days, these blank hole, I guess I'll use that word. We don't have the. You're on Sirius XM. We're on some over-the-air stations here, so we've got
you have FCC requirements.
Yeah, we got to be.
And it's funny because I never heard the vulgarity used so much on cable news as I did the first night that CNN and other used. So people who may not understand, FCC has certain rules. And even though you are a partner with satellite radio, which is like, cable and satellite TV, we have a certain freedom. And as I always tell people, sometimes you have to be profane to be profound. The comedians do it all the time. Vicente Fox, my goodness, a former president of Mexico, has really cut loose on this administration. So but I got to tell you, it hits home personally because I should point out today, Tom, one of the things we did, we played on my show, because I was at a National Action Network breakfast honoring Dr. King, by the way, with Dr. King's son, Martin III, and Dr. King's grandchild was there, and they presented several of us an award. One of the sanitation strikers from Memphis, your good friend Randy Weingarten.
Oh yeah.
And she received a Lifetime Service Award, and then a young lady, Miss Ingram, who got the Breaking Barrier Award. She's with Airbnb, Director of National Partnership, and then yours truly. But I played today for the sake of millennials, baby boomers, anybody who, maybe was alive during the time of Martin Luther King. Several of his complete speeches. For example, we played his first speech as president of the Montgomery Movement Association. Then we played the eulogy for the 4 young girls who were killed at the 16th Street bombing. We played a speech he gave from the Lincoln Memorial, not the I Have a Dream speech, but one almost a decade before on Give Us the Vote. And then the entire speech of the I Have a Dream, his last speech, the entire speech. All these were played in their entirety because I wanted people to understand that Martin Luther King was more than just a sloganeer. He was a man of substance, and he spoke in substantive ways. So when you ask me what do I think of, let's say, the latest episode with the president referring to the continent of Africa as an S-hole, Haiti as an S-hole. I have a grandson who is half Haitian. His father is Haitian. Matter of fact, his father and President Obama family are relatives. They're from the same tribe. I had to sit there and tell my grandson that your ancestors, your family on that side are not from an S-hole country.
Wow.
Because there's no way that I'm going to allow him, the president, to plant a seed of negativity, of racism in his fertile 11-year-old mind. And Dr. King spoke of that when he gave this speech, one of them that we played, when he had to explain to his children why they could not swim in the public swimming pool in Atlanta. And he said it plants a seed of negativity because it says you're different and you are marginalized and you are inferior. And that's what he called it, a seed of inferiority. So when you start talking about people from Haiti, from Africa, and not have the sense enough to know that Africa is not a country, but a continent of 53 countries, one of them you spent time with, we spent time with, the youngest country, matter of fact, South Sudan. You know, he is planting in the minds of every young child who heard that, unfiltered, heard it unfiltered on television, heard it from their parents talking about it, that planted a seed of inferiority in their minds. And that is what is so harmful with what he did. I don't think since Woodrow Wilson have we had a president that has been so overt and blatantly racist as Donald Trump has demonstrated during his campaign. And the thing that really, and I'll close this part, that disappoints me more than anything else. You had grown men and women in that meeting who heard him say it and didn't have the courage to admit it. But most important of all, didn't have the courage to say to him, Mr. President, the United States, the President of the United States can not only talk that way, he can't think that way. Not in a world where we are so interdependent on each other. And that's why I played the speeches of Martin Luther King, because that's what he said. We're tied together, and that's what his son said this morning's breakfast. We're tied together in a single garment of destiny called in an inescapable network of mutuality. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. Most of us, matter of fact, I would dare say all of us, by the time we woke up this morning, got coffee, tea, put on our clothes, we probably depended on half the globe to provide those things we're wearing and eating.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The great Joe Madison is with us. We'll be back. Joe, you're with us for the half hour, right?
I'm with it as long as you want me.
I would love it. Thank you. Hey, we'll be right back. We'll be right back with Joe Madison. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Joe's website, by the way, joemadison.com, and you can tweet him at Madison SiriusXM. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Joe, you're still with us?
Oh, yes.
Great. We've lost SiriusXM, but we're still on, because they're in a commercial break, but we're still on Free Speech TV, and we're still live on Pacifica stations all over the country, on YouTube, on, everywhere else. So to continue our conversation, this is just not, if I could just ask a kind of a inside radio question. Back, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 years ago, back early on in this show, I played a fairly long clip of, well, actually, a minute or two, it wasn't that long, come to think of it, of Martin Luther King on the program, and was contacted by a lawyer saying, you're in violation of the King family copyright. And we've put a couple of King clips into pieces over the years, and YouTube has knocked them down for copyright violations. And so this morning, Nate said, you want me to get some King video or audio up? And I was like, I don't think we can do that. Has something changed? I know the King family really locked a lot of that stuff down for a while. Are there things that are in the public domain? How did you play those?
Well, no. What I happened to have was a collection of CDs and of the speeches that were recorded, and by the way, sold. And that's what's so fascinating. Most people don't realize that Motown, because Berry Gordy, the Gordy family, and King, and Coretta Scott King were all from the state of Alabama. And so those are the recordings I listened to 50 years ago. And they are out there. I mean, you can walk into a vinyl record store and get an album of the I Have a Dream speech. By the way, the first time it was actually, one of the first times it was actually given was in Detroit, Michigan, a month before the March on Washington in August of '63. So to answer your question directly, matter of fact, I told Martin that this is what we were doing. He said, no, the problem is that you have people who are using King's speeches or clips from his speeches for commercialism.
Yeah, well, I'm a commercial radio show.
For commercials.
Yeah.
They're using it and in essence selling whatever they're selling, and that's what the King family had to put a stop to, because their father's speeches or clips from the speeches were being used for profit companies, and they so it's like, for example, Earth, Wind and Fire. You hear or Chicago or the Beatles. Every time that music is played, because it's copywritten, they have to pay.
Sure.
the entity for it.
Sure.
So people are using the King's speeches, and even though they have been copywritten, and most of them had been, and not paying a dime.
Yeah.
And they were selling cell phones.
Right. Right. So you did it with the permission
That's
of
what that was about.
of Martin Luther King III.
Yes,
yeah.
right.
Okay.
That's what that really was about. But to be safe, I even contacted Martin and said, is there a problem?
That's great.
And his point was, no, you already have.
Okay, we're hitting a break, Joe. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
With us, we are talking about the state of Martin Luther King's dream. And Joe, to what extent, I want to talk about Donald Trump and the state of race relations in the United States and all that kind of stuff. But and I'm wondering, and I have this battle inside, this debate inside my own brain almost every day. As Trump does these absurd and obscene things, and they're not limited to race, but certainly that's at the top of the list, I think. I'm wondering if he has ripped off the mask. I mean, you've got all these so-called respectable Republicans. You mentioned Tom Cotton and David Perdue, who, he didn't, he definitely didn't say it.
First they didn't recall it. Then, they get pressure, political pressure, and then say, no, he didn't say it. So, it's either or. I mean, it can't be both. I didn't recall. Then all of a sudden, within, 24 hours, 48 hours, all of a sudden you had, your mind clicked in.
Right.
And we know what that's
right.
about. Most people do.
So my question is he, if we look at this in the long term, if we were to look at this inside of a 10 or 20 or 30-year window rather than just, in this painful moment, is it possible that by tearing off the mask of white supremacy and racism that is at the core of the Republican Party, the modern Republican Party, arguably has been, well, that's a whole nother conversation, but anyhow, certainly today. And by tearing off that mask, it seems to me that at least for many white Americans, Trump is forcing them to either wake up or jump on his train. It's like, he's presenting white Americans with a choice. And I think long-term, that's probably going to be a good thing, even though short-term, it's solidifying his base, and we're seeing this massive spike in hate incidents and all this kind of stuff. What do you think?
Well, I think you're onto something. First, as you were trying to formulate the question, and I was listening very carefully, I think we have to keep in mind that this strain of Trumpism has hijacked the Republican Party, and that at least the Republican Party that you knew and I knew, the Republican Party, for example, that was Lincoln's party. Of course, that's over 100 years ago. but it was Republicans that also, for example, a lot of people don't know that Richard Nixon, even though he had some problems, policy-wise, a lot of people don't know that Richard Nixon actually introduced affirmative action. He had a great African-American working beside him named Arthur Fletcher, who was a good friend of mine since, but he was the father of affirmative action, and it was a public policy issue. But the reality is that we should not. I'm not surprised anymore, and I'm not going to act surprised on what Donald Trump says or really what he does. He did that during the campaign. We kept telling people, at least I know you did, and on my show I did, and my audience did, we recognized the dog whistle. We recognized what he was and what he had been. You know, I must tell you, Tom, I have never, and I think you probably would understand this too, I've never known or interviewed or seen interviewed a person who was racist who thought they were racist.
Yep.
If you notice that, they never, every now and then you get someone who says, so what, I'm a racist. But David Duke doesn't think he's a racist. You end up with the president saying men carrying tiki torches and telling Jews, they're not going to take over and the rest of you can go back. We all know that that's racist. There are those in the Republican Party. I know them. I talk with them. I read their writings, who are Republicans. They are conservatives. They are white men and women. But their problem is that they're either silent or their voices are not being heard by right-wing conservative talk radio, and particularly all of the backbenchers that are out here who wait to get their marching orders from Levine, from the
Hannity's guy,
Stringers,
Hannity's
Hannity.
guys, yeah.
And Hannity, it's interesting. These are the folk, when you meet them, they smile in your face. Oh, how you doing, Tom? How you doing, Joe? And the reality is it's not so much what they say or how they say it to you. It's their policies. It's their public policies that we have to be opposed to. I would ask Donald Trump this question, and this is the other thing reporters ought to do. Mr. Trump, you're 71 years old, let's say going on your 72nd year in life. Where were you when Martin Luther King Jr. was marching?
Yeah.
Where were you? And what was your position on the Voting Rights Act? Now, either you were with him or you were silent.
Joe,
or you were opposed to him.
Forgive my interrupting. It's a hard break. May I ask you for another half hour of your time, sir?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Joe Madison, stick around, please. The great Joe Madison is with us here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Check out Joe's website at joemadison.com. Madison Sirius XM is the Twitter handle. We'll be right back. Oh, and of course, listen to him on Sirius XM channel 126. In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso López de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, the case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, there was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and draw up his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him. He got down off his horse, kneeled down and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped. We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us, the great Joe Madison, my colleague on Sirius XM. He's on Sirius XM channel 126. The Joe Madison Show, civil and human rights activist. JoeMadison.com is the website. Madison Sirius XM is his Twitter handle. Do I have all that right, Joe?
Yeah, you know, I'm just embarrassed you keep saying the great. You know,
I think you're great,
and I appreciate it. You know, I was sitting here, kind of watching some of my tweets come in and emails, and I don't know. Do you get this a lot when you speak up against racism? Then people email you and tweet you and call you the racist.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and I think
projection.
to myself, all my life, adult life, I mean, all my life, I've been victim. Oh, you're not supposed to be a victim, but I have been. You know, my grandparents from Mississippi and a victim of racism my entire life, adult life. Most of us spent politically with the NAACP on their board of directors, their political director, you know, going into South Sudan like we did. You know, Tom, all you have to do is go look at is just go on and look at the bio. I mean, Wikipedia. I mean, every now and then they get something wrong. Like I found I was dead a few years ago.
Oops.
But I mean, you know, there's nothing there but fighting racism. And then you get folk who sit up here and then accuse you of being a racist when there's nothing in your background.
Yeah.
That speaks of special privilege or exploitation. Hell, man, I haven't exploited white people. Matter of fact, it's been just the opposite, and it just angers me. But we're in that kind of, I guess that type of society. I don't know. Someone called it. What's the term they use? Cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Well, I can tell you that
if that's a lot of that's going around.
Oh yeah. Well, as a white kid who grew up in the 50s, when I you know I grew up in a lower middle class white suburb of Lansing, Michigan, and I did not meet a black person until I was probably 12, 13 years old. Yeah. But the pictures that I saw of black people, what I understood of black people on television was Amos and Andy. It was these cartoons with these minstrel-like black people in them, the old Warner Brothers cartoons and whatnot. All of these stereotypes basically presented the notion that the white race was superior to the black race, and that imprints. I got to tell you, Joe, that imprints on young white people, and it's a hell of a job to extract that crap out of the deep recesses of your psyche.
So let me, Tom, put this in the words that I have used for the last 10 years that nobody wants. I'm probably going to have to, write it in stone. And here's what I say. And this, in essence, is exactly what you just said. In America, and matter of fact, you can say globally, but in America, we are culturally conditioned to believe that white is superior and black is inferior. And the manifestation of that cultural conditioning is that black people in this country and globally are undervalued, underestimated, and marginalized. Now, I don't care who's listening to your show. They cannot deny that. Matter of fact, black people, sometimes, often, because of cultural conditioning, believe and accept their own inferiority. I mean, we are all culturally conditioned, and what you just said is so true. Culture is the most difficult thing to change in human beings. I don't care where you live or what you do. It is the most difficult. Like, for example, when Donald Trump said, and you proved the point, when Donald Trump said these S-holes countries, Haiti and Africa, the continent of Africa, what was the first defense that folks said? Number one, this will play great in his base because they're culturally conditioned to believe that. Number two, what was the second thing they said? This is how people talk at bars, at family dinners. Well, let me tell you something. And then I end up at a dinner where there's a former attorney general, a 4-star African-American general who is a nuclear scientist who went to a historically black college, Howard University, who was in charge of nuclear weapons. And if I would say that to people, they would say, "Oh no, that's not true." It is. You hit it, and we need to just be honest about this. But it's extremely difficult. Culture changes. I mean, we have changed. Look, the reason black folk couldn't marry white folk, wouldn't marry black people, is because they believed they were inferior. And it took law, it took social, it took laws to change it. It took public policy to change. This is what King talked about. Africa was raped by Europe for natural resources and human resources. Now, countries in Africa, tribes in Africa had wars, but so did tribes and nations on the continent of Europe. But African nations didn't rape Europe of natural resources. Matter of fact, quite candidly, that's one of the reasons they sailed from Europe was because of all the natural resources.
Search of gold.
This is part of our culture, and we were changing. We were right there. The election of Barack Obama broke down one major stereotype, that a black man would never be the leader of a free world. Even though King believed it would happen, Bobby Kennedy believed it would happen. He said so in a speech almost 40 years ago. And we were at that point where we broke that aspect of that negative culture, only to be snapped right back in it with a man who then said, he's not legitimate. He's not an American. And that's how he started to, when once again he played to the cultural ignorance. Martin Luther King Jr., and I said it this morning, my favorite quote from Dr. King is not "I have a dream." He said the two most dangerous things on the planet are sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And we are in a time where people are suffering from both. And quite candidly, I think that's what President Trump suffers from. And one King member said, "Oh, he's not racist, he's just racially uninformed." Well, all right, so that would be sincere ignorance. But there are times when he has been conscientiously stupid, such as when it came to the birth certificate, such as when it came to not accepting the fact that the Central Park Five were innocent, and even doubling down on it. I mean, marginalizing, African Americans when you say to black people during the campaign, "Well, what do you have to lose?"
Yeah.
What are you talking about? What do we have to lose? We have a lot that we've gained from the time Dr. King was alive to where we are now. We have all that to lose if we don't stay alert.
Yeah. The Donald Trump's quotes are being cited as evidence of racism. His where he specifically speaks of race. I'm concerned about all the times he says he believes in the racehorse theory of genetics, which is that some people are genetically superior to others. That's the core of this whole problem.
Right. That's the whole genetics. That's exact.
This is Woodrow Wilson.
That somehow your bloodline, your DNA determines how high you will rise. So explain to me how most of the African immigrants that come to the United States to live and to work have more advanced degrees than American citizens. Yeah. Explain to me how Haiti, which happens to be the ancestral home of one of the great sociologists and thinkers of our time, W.E.B. Du Bois. Explain to me how a former U.S. Attorney General, Eric Holder, whose family is from what? A Caribbean country. Oh, excuse me. And have we forgotten Colin Powell and where he came from?
Yep.
See, it is, and then somebody said, well, he's not, one of the King family members said, well, he's not racist in the traditional sense. Now stop for a moment.
We're hitting a break here. Joe Madison is with us, my colleague on Sirius XM, and we will be right back with more of our conversation with Joe here on Martin Luther King Day.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back. Check out joemadison.com, and you can tweet him at, where'd it go? At Madison Sirius XM. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Joe, we're in that kind of middle period that I was telling you about before. What is the state of Martin Luther King's dream? Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I pause only because I'm trying to think of an answer.
I thought maybe you didn't hear.
I mean, first of all, I think we need to go back and put the slogan, I have a dream, aside and look at the totality of that speech. The reason they chose the Lincoln Memorial instead to stage that instead of the Washington Monument was because Lincoln had a dream. Lincoln had made a promise so that almost 100 years later in King's speech, he said, if you listen to that speech, you wrote a check, and he says that you wrote a check for our freedom, you wrote a check for justice, you wrote a check for opportunity for former slaves who have now been freed. And when we went to cash that check, when we tried to get into colleges, when we tried to do banking, when we tried to own land, when we tried to be citizens, the check came back insufficient funds. That's why the Lincoln Memorial was chosen, and that was the essence of his speech. The I have a dream part was the climax to a sermon that, most Baptist preachers would engage in. That's why today we played the entire speech. And I've been to a mountaintop speech. Oh, when you hear the entire speech and not that slogan at the end, man, he talked about economic boycott. He said maybe we're going to have to start boycotting. We're going to have to start boycotting Seal Test and Coca-Cola. And remember why he was in Memphis. He was in Memphis to support working people. Like Martin III said today, Dr. King was talking about a livable wage over 50 years ago.
Yep.
50 years ago. He brings it up in the speech. in Memphis. Here, we can't even talk about, we can't even get a $15 an hour wage. So I say to you, that where the dream is, that for many, the dream has been, people are living the dream. The dream has been realized, but, and I know, and this is what Republicans love to say, oh, unemployment is among black folk, and you don't give the Trump credit. It's lower than it's ever have been. It didn't start with Trump. My goodness, this was this unemployment of the black community, and the Obama administration cut it in half. And it's like you can't tell people anything. How many African Americans? You mentioned Lansing. I'm from Detroit. How many black folk worked and got their opportunity to live the dream, working in the automotive industry, right?
Yeah. Joe,
who saved the automotive industry?
Yeah, it was Barack Obama. You're right. We're hitting a break here. We'll be right back. Joe Madison with us. Stick around.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
The Joe Madison Show on Sirius XM channel 126 is on from 6 to 10 a.m. And if you haven't checked Joe's show out before, please go out of your way to do so. He's absolutely brilliant. JoeMadison.com. You can tweet him at Madison Sirius XM. Joe, we're in the last 8 minutes here. This show is just flying by. To what extent do you see? How to organize this question? How do you, from what you're hearing from your listeners and what you're seeing and the folks that you know, what kind of awakening? I know on the hard right and the angry right and the racist right, there's an awakening. It's like, oh boy, we got our guy in, and we got our media and we got Fox and we got all this stuff. But what about the rest of the country? Even in this hard time, do you think that we're moving forward?
Oh yes. I mean, the emphatic answer to that, the short answer is, of course, we are moving forward. And I was with some people the other day, and I said to them, we've seen this movie before. We saw. Look, we moved forward. Yeah. Look, I mean, you take Charlene Hunter Galt, where George, almost riots took place because she wanted to enroll in the University of Alabama. Well, if you watch the University of Alabama win that football game, trust me, they didn't have any problem letting black folk in that university. Mm-hmm. And most of them are very pleased that black people live there. Of course, we've moved forward. I mentioned here you've got an African American who's president who would have dreamed. My parents and grandparents would never have dreamed that would have been possible. I mentioned the fact that you've got I met a 4-star general, Air Force general. Yes, we've moved forward. Take the white superintendent from the U.S. Air Force. Oh, man, go back and play that tape, that recording, where they had this episode that was really contrived about, that was racist. Somebody planted some racist flyers or something. Would you have ever dreamt when you were growing up in Lansing that you would have had the superintendent of the United States Air Force bring all the cadets together and say, look, if you can't respect a person's different gender, you got to go. If you can't respect a person's different race, you got to go. And he went down that list. So the reality is that we have moved forward as individuals, and because we have moved forward as individuals, our institutions have moved forward too. We're just at a stage right now where there was a backlash. I'm convinced, and somebody said this who writes much better than I do. I think the young Coates said this. There would not be a Donald Trump if there had not been a Barack Obama.
Yep.
And I believe that.
Yeah, I agree.
This is a backlash of a small group of people who are very vocal, who, by the way, and I'll say it and I mean it, and I've heard you say it on your show, who are supported by conservative, right-wing talk radio. No ifs, ands, buts about it. I mean, that is their job, and thank God for like Sirius XM and some other entities out here, but they are supported. And look what happened when they thought that President Trump was going soft on immigration. They jumped Trump like the racists jumped Martin Luther King Jr. And it's like they were all reading from the same playbook. And then he decided, I better spring back so that I don't lose their support. Because if Donald Trump loses their support, Tom, he's through.
Yeah, he's got nothing.
He's got nothing. I'm telling you, because the independents aren't going with this. There are true conservative Republicans who know that this man has hijacked the Republican Party. The problem is that it's in Washington, D.C., as you know, it's all about power and arithmetic. Those who have the numbers usually control the power, and folks are afraid to give up that power. So what they do is they remain silent when they know that this is wrong. So to answer your question, we have not come this far to go back to where Donald Trump is stuck. He suffers. People talk about his mental state. He suffers from cognitive dissonance, and that's exactly what he's up. He thinks the world is still flat.
Yeah, and white. I mean, it's like
yes, flat and white.
Yeah,
and he fails to realize that 75% of this planet are made up of people of color, which, by the way, we depend on, from everything from the coffee we drink in the morning to the sheets we get in between at night. You folks ought to take off your shirt and look at the label and see where it came from.
There you go.
It might have come from one of these S-hole countries. And by the way, if it's such an S-hole,
Joe, we're out of time.
If Africa is such an S-hole continent, then why did his wife move her company over there?
There you go.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task. Wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso López de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmanto de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject, just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, a case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, "There was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and drop his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, 'Let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him.' He got down off his horse, kneeled down and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped." We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Martin Luther King Day. David Duke tweeted, day before yesterday, "Just as the most ardent Trump supporters were about to give up on him in despair, he restores a lot of love in us by saying blunt but truthful things that no other president in our lifetime would dare say. No DACA, no compromise, no S-hole America. Hail Trump." Mrs. Betty Bowers retweets it and says, "Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas may be conveniently, I would add David Perdue, hard of hearing when it comes to Donald Trump's overt racism, but the former Grand Wizard of the KKK heard it loud and clear." Yeah. Let's ask Joe Messina about this. He is the host of the Real Side radio program. The website is therealside.com. You can tweet him at The Real Side or at Joe Messina, Messina. Joe, welcome back to the program.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Sure. As a Trump supporter, how do you deal with this kind of and this level of blatant racism? And I'm not just talking about his S-hole comments. I mean, this goes back all the way, the Central Park Five, the many comments he's made about his superior genes and I mean, he's sounding like Woodrow Wilson here. Is this the face of your party?
Actually, he sounds like a successful New York businessman in most cases. I love how you pull the worst of the worst out, David Duke. You say it goes all the way back to the Central Park Five. Why don't you mention Jesse Jackson along with many other black leaders who gave him an award for his continued support of the black community, of the lower socioeconomic people. He's one of the first major developers in New York that actually hired an African-American female to supervise some of his largest projects. I don't know. I just find it amazing that you take this little spark and you throw all kinds of paper on it and say, look at the fire that he did. He didn't do anything. I do not believe for a second that Donald Trump is a racist, especially when you take the true meaning of the word racism. Tom, I got to ask you a question. When you start using a word like racism for everything from peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to every comment that the president makes, aren't you guilty of making that word of no consequence?
Let's say that the word racism I mean, there's a lot of different definitions for the word racism, but I think the simplest one, and the one that most people understand, is a belief that your race is superior to another race or all other races. Are you suggesting that that's not a prevalent notion in conservative circles in particular and in the Republican Party in general?
Listen, I'm a Republican.
And if not, Joe, why so few black candidates and why so little black support and Hispanic support and Asian support for that matter?
You can say that all you want to, but it's not true. Look,
I'm asking a question.
No, but I'm saying even me here locally in my area of Southern California, we have many blacks and Hispanics in our group. Look, I think it's hilarious. You say we have no support. In the last presidential election, what did you offer up in the Democratic Party? 4 old white people, and you're the tent of diversity. You couldn't find an African American woman.
So I don't think you're answering my question, Joe. I mean, you're.
I am answering your question. We had Cruz, we had Hispanics, we had blacks, we had women. So don't say that we don't have that kind of support. No, racism does not run rampant in the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, we have a history of not being racist.
And so yet, whenever I see a picture of all the Republicans in Congress gathered together, I see Tim Scott, one black face. I see what's her name, Mia Love, one black face. And that's it, isn't it?
And you've got the likes of let me see, Sheila Jackson Lee, who says the Constitution's over 400 years old. Maxine Waters, who's I'm sure she's of your ilk.
So your response is to attack black people in the Democratic Party. I'm asking you about the Republican Party.
I like how you do that. No,
I'm asking you a simple question.
My response is to say, you call out the fact that we don't have any.
At what point does the Republican Party start pushing back against racism? I mean, at least Richard Nixon introduced.
How should I push back?
Richard Nixon.
So we push out.
Richard Nixon introduced affirmative action, Joe. When is the Republican Party going to go back to Richard Nixon?
Why would I want to go backwards? I'm going to go forward. I want the best person for the job.
So you want to go forward to David Duke?
I don't care what color they are. No, I didn't. That's you, not me. I don't support David Duke. That's you. All right? I don't give him time on my show.
But you're saying essentially, I've had David Duke on this program. You're saying the same things.
No, Tom. I want the best American for the job. That's what I want. I want the most qualified. I do not want to vote for somebody because they're a black American or they're a female. We need a female president. There's a good slogan, right? Vote for me because I'm the only female running.
Joe, nobody is suggesting that. What I'm saying is that you're not either black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, and broadly women are not interested in becoming Republican politicians, or the Republican Party's policies or institutions are keeping them out. Which is it?
Meg Whitman wasn't a woman, I guess. I don't know. Carly Fiorina wasn't a woman, I guess. I don't know.
I get the whole some of my best friends are Jews routine. I know, Donald Trump tried that too, but that wasn't my question, Joe. Why are these people not in your party?
Women. We don't support women, but we do. We put them up more than you do.
So you don't have an answer. Your answer is Democrats bad. Is that your answer to everything? Democrats bad?
No. I'm saying
sure. The Democratic Party has got problems too. Racism and sexism and misogyny are endemic. Right across the board, particularly in white America.
Both parties have problems. You and I both know that, okay? And one of my mantras on my show is that we become Democrats and Republicans.
I'm acknowledging that, but I'm saying, where are these people in the Republican Party? Are they not there because you're keeping them out, or are they not there because they look at the Republican Party and they say, that's a hellhole, I'm not going there?
I'm answering your question. You asked me, where are they? They do run on a regular basis. Look at California. Look at our candidates as a whole across the country.
You've got one black member of Congress from California, and you've got one black member of the Senate from South Carolina.
Finish the sentence, Tom. One got elected in that particular case, but we have others. We have others here in California. We have many blacks and Hispanics that fill.
This is like, Joe, do you realize you're sounding like when Donald Trump said, there's my African American?
Well, maybe to you I do. I am answering your question. You asked me where they were. I said they run. You asked me, what is your question is how did they get elected? How come they don't get elected? I don't know. Ask them what their message is.
My question is, why is it that when I look at these pictures of the Republican caucus, you know, celebrating a tax cut or celebrating cuts to welfare or celebrating cuts to education, it's always a bunch of white people.
Well,
what's going on with your party?
I can't answer the question.
America is not all white people.
They don't win office.
So it's the Republican voter you're blaming.
I don't need a college degree for this. No, because last I checked, you can vote Democrat or Republican.
So the Republican voters are not elected, or is it that the but I'm not seeing the people in the primaries.
The voters as a whole in an area are not electing. That's what's happening. Isn't that what it boils down to? You check the box, and it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat in a general election. You check the box, right?
So, okay. I guess my question is, how can you support Trump intentionally making racist comments and then bragging about it? As Eric Erickson, your colleague, pointed out on Twitter this morning, Trump was calling up his friends saying, my base is going to love it that I trash these black countries. And so how can you support Trump making these racist comments and bragging about it? Or are you part of the racist base that's pleased by it?
No, well, I'm part of the truth base, like you claim to be. All right, I don't. So Durbin and Erickson and those guys have been so on in the past. You know as well as I do.
Erickson's a Republican.
The Democrat Party, the Republican Party, when we go after one of our own, he doesn't have total support. Trump does not have total support from our party.
Yeah.
Not everybody's on his page, including myself.
Okay, Joe Messina, therealside.com is the website. You can tweet him at therealside or at Joe Messina, Messina. Joe, thanks for being with us.
Always fun, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More of the news of the day, your calls, finally, and, you know, my thoughts on all the above. And welcome back. There's my mouse. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, as far as, what your topic is today, and then in light of, Martin Luther King's birthday, the commemoration of his life, I just wanted to say, his Poor People's Campaign is going to be continued by Reverend Barber, and he had a very interesting conversation, since he is a reverend, with a religious fundamentalist who made a very interesting comment, and he said that, in this comment, he said, we need to be converted, this Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, we need to be converted from, I guess what he was admitting was a very hypocritical and decadent part of evangelicalism in the South, and that is the religion of whiteness to the religion of Christ, which is universal. And
who also was not white.
Right. He probably was very dark. He could have been even African descent. Many people in the Middle East are, because, of course, a good, portion of the Middle East is in Africa. But what I really wanted to talk about is this is a part of the problem of, I think, capitalism, of empire. This is how people are controlled. It was used by the British with their white man's burden in India, and it was used by us to develop this country. And I think, Martin Luther King wanted to, bring that to the attention of people during his life, and I think he did make that understood to some people. He was a very devout Christian, but he realized how Christianity could be used to further ignorance and further hate toward other people. It's a very strong ideological tool that was used in the South. And, it's still, unfortunately, it hadn't died with civil rights, even though the structure had changed within the South and people have made great strides. Culturally, it still lives in the hearts and minds of probably everyone, including myself, and we need to be freed of this. I think particularly religious people need to be concerned about it because it makes us hypocrites. But, it's very hopeful in the sense that it's a tool that could be used to undermine what the brainwashing that a lot of people get within these churches in the South and in other parts of the country, even here, where people are told that the Republican Party is the party of God and the Democratic Party is the party of the devil. It's totally untrue. And, it was a very interesting conversation that Dr. Barber had with this Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. And he was a page for Strom Thurmond, and he said that, he began to question a lot of what he, even as a young person, how hypocritical things were in terms of the politics that were expressed by Strom Thurmond and many people.
John, we're hitting a break here.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the call. Well said. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Boy, what a day. Our quote for the day is from Sir Edmund Burke, the British late 17th century, 18th century, the late 18th century conservative. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil, Sir Edmund Burke said, is for good men to do nothing. Remarkable. And so what's happening with these so-called good men? Well, according to Tom Cotton, Trump never said that. And according to David Perdue, these sniveling cowards, Trump never said that. We just have to suck up to him, Oh, how sad. I mean, it really, really, really is sad. Some quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed, from his letter from a Birmingham City jail. The question is not whether will we be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? From that same letter. And he said, the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council of the KKK, but the white moderate. And in fact, this is from his Birmingham jail letter. I just want to share, I'm going to read a fair amount of this. It's absolutely brilliant. He said, we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you've seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your brothers and sisters at whim, When you've seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, or even kill your black brothers and sisters? When you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society? When you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you try to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she's told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people. When you have to concoct an answer for your 5-year-old son who is asking, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes the N-word. Your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you are harried day by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who constantly says, "I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action," who paternalistically believes you can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance, it's much more bewildering than outright rejection. Excerpts from Martin Luther King's, and I encourage you to read the entire letter. It's easily available all over the place online, from Martin Luther King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. It's extraordinary. Jay in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Jay. Oh, hey, Jay. We have 20 seconds. Jay, hold on. I'm going to get back to you in just a second. But it is Martin Luther King Day. The speech. He was arrested on April 12, 1963, for violating Alabama's laws against, quote, mass public demonstrations. And they threw him in jail in Birmingham, Alabama. And the day after his arrest, this is from Deneen L. Brown in today's Washington Post, the day after his arrest, 8 prominent white clergy members placed an ad in the Birmingham News accusing King of being an outside agitator whose demonstrations were, quote, unwise and untimely, which is what provoked the letter from a Birmingham jail. It's absolutely brilliant. There are elections tomorrow. I'll tell you about that after the break, and we'll pick up your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Live in Wisconsin, Iowa, or South Carolina, get ready to go to the polls tomorrow. There are elections. Things are happening. We'll be back.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast.
As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks, with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small-town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small-town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the
company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard.
Listen anytime, any place you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What a remarkable day. I am now convinced. This is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King from Where Do We Go From Here, 1967. He said, I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed matter, the guaranteed income. The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. It is socially as cruel and blind as the practice of cannibalism at the dawn of civilization, when men ate each other because they had not yet learned to take food from the soil or to consume the abundant animal life around them. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. Dr. Martin Luther King, if America does not, this is from the speech at Charles Bishop Mason Temple in the Church of God in Christ in support of the Memphis sanitation workers. This was 2 weeks before he was assassinated. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. In his speech to the Negro American Labor Council in 1961, he said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. And finally, he said, the evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and the evils of racism. Tony in Los Angeles. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I was just calling to say I know Dr. King is rolling over in his grave. When you think about what he said, it's just as true now. Now, the thing from the Birmingham jail you just read,
right.
Take out the part about not going to a park or a swimming pool. Other than that, everything is still the same.
Yeah, replace it with a boardroom or a conference room. Yeah.
And the only thing is they turned, even with the civil rights movement, they turned it away from economics and put it on just the civil part. So that's why we can go to the park today, because they'll take our money.
And I think
you won't do anything else.
Yeah, and I think you could build an argument, Tony, that the largely white power structure that made that decision simply decided that it would be to their benefit to turn African Americans and you know other people of color, broadly speaking, but to turn people into consumers rather than voters.
And that's exactly what they've done. And what we need to do, Tom, everybody needs to get off the BS. The bottom line is no. Our race relations haven't changed, because 200-some girls can get kidnapped in Nigeria and nothing. Nobody really does anything. One little white girl can come up missing in Bahamas or somewhere, and the whole world, changing their Facebook page profile and everything else. So, I'm sick of it. Now, I'm 56 years old, and I've seen quite a bit, even in my time. And we keep going over the same thing and nothing changes. And that's where Dr. King is true with the so-called liberal white person or whatever. Nothing's changed. You still benefiting from white racism and from white supremacy. And you're only going to go so far to challenge that, because if there's so many good people, why hasn't anything changed in 50 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
The man has been dead 50 years, and then not dead, he was assassinated. We need to quit this little pie in the sky, oh, kumbaya. The man was shot in the throat and bled out, okay?
Yeah.
So why don't we everybody got to get off that stuff. Black people got to wake up. We need to keep all our stuff to ourselves. All this cultural appropriation that people are making money off of, we need to stop. And if we don't make the money off of it, you shouldn't have it. White people need to quit saying, oh, I hate this is happening, but they don't do anything about it.
Well said, Tony.
I'm done.
Okay, very well said. Great rant. Thank you very much. Great to hear from you. Michael in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Michael, what's up?
How you doing, Mr. Hartman? You got a great show.
Thank you.
Thank you, too, sir. I just want to make a comment and just say I see it a little different, and I don't want nobody listening to think I'm dumb. But I think that the relationships in America and the world, and I see you got to know the history of the world. They are great compared to how they used to be. We have made so many strides. You keep forgetting now. You got black millionaires. You got black people that own businesses. You got black colleges. But you also got black and white people that love and care and get along. And that's the part that you just read just a while ago. I'm gonna make it quick about how the industry type people try to dominate the world and have military backing them. That's the problem. You see, that's why I don't like to get into the race thing. White people have done white people wrong. Black people have done black people wrong. The whole continent of Europe was destroyed. There was 1 million people killed in, I think, 90 days, not too long ago, in Rwanda. And it's happened in China. It's happened over the world. And so when they come to what Mr. Trump said, that's common sense that it was wrong. But you can't judge the whole entire system on what a few people do. We have had great strides, like people like you and a lot of other people. See, and I'm getting ready to get off. But most of the time, there's white men didn't have to do it, but they died for black folk. They fought for black folk. And white people and black people went to World War I and II and fought for white. It's a long history. But what I'm trying to say is I just see it as a great country, and people like you and other people, white and black, Indian and Chinese, makes the world a great place, and it'll be better, and we'll keep progressing. And I love you, and I thank you for letting me have a little speech on your show. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Michael. Hey, Michael, before you go?
Yes, sir.
You know, a lot of what you said kind of contradicts what Tony, I believe her name was, who was on just before you, was saying. It seems to me that the reality is sort of in between. You know, that yeah, we've made a lot of progress, but there are huge structural impediments that still exist, not the least of which is poverty, the result of institutional and structural racism. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's why I say what you said earlier about the industrial people that run that's in charge of stuff. They have a lot to do with that. But those same people, if they lose their stock and their money, and they were in that same situation. Because remember now, World War II had showed if you can be high on your horse, but if you fall, you'll be begging and a line for food and everything. So it's like the human defect of evolution. We haven't evolved to love everybody yet. But compared to how it used to be, Mr. Tom, can't nobody say that we haven't made progress and be telling the truth. You got black brick home areas and black and white. I'm not going to divide the races because, like I said, white people have suffered just like black people have. All human beings have suffered under people, that want to make more money than other people. Like you just said.
Yeah,
if you listen to your show, it's a great learning.
And poor whites have no friggin' idea. It's amazing. Michael, thank you for the call. Well said. Rudy in Atlanta. Hey, Rudy, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
You asked Joe the question that has this country progressed, and I think we fell short in just one thing. White America has taken a step back. And the saddest part about it is they're going to pay for it.
See,
it's going to be something that money can't buy and a gun can't kill.
Yeah. But, Rudy, I don't think that white America has taken a step back. I think what happened was the equivalent of walking into your kitchen in the evening in an old house, an old farmhouse or something, and putting a piece of cheese on the floor and turning the lights off and just sitting there and watching, and all of a sudden the mice start coming out. The mice were there all along, or the rats were there all along. Donald Trump just came along and put the cheese on the floor, and now all the white racists are coming out. I don't think that we've gone backwards. I think we're just seeing what was always there.
Well, I mean, what you're basically saying is a matter of perspective.
Yeah, you're right.
Tom, I don't say this with joy because we're human. And the thing about it is, like I say, Tom, white America is in a crossroad.
Yeah.
And it's no other way around it. I mean, hey, the only way you can cure something is for it to be exposed. And the more this is being exposed, hopefully the millennial, the white kids, all kids take this situation right here and hopefully they make the best of it. But it's some explaining has to be done from white America. White America has to explain to their white kids, to the young kids, what's going on, because these millennials, they don't know the history. I don't even think they even take time to even want to learn the history.
Or they don't have the time. I mean, a lot of millennials are so far in debt or just working so hard just to find a damn job, because of Reaganomics. I mean, it's just devastated this country. But I think you're absolutely right, Rudy.
And some explaining has to be done. It sickens me to see how parents are going to tell their kids about racism.
I'm with you. Rudy, thank you for the call. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. Actually, we're going to check in with Talk Media News now, aren't we? I believe Bob Ney will be with us in just a few minutes. Well, 4 minutes specifically. Stick around. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
No jaunty greeting today, Tom. I want to give you the perspective of a white kid in the projects that grew up outside of Oakland, California.
Okay. In the project. You grew up in a black neighborhood, do you mean?
Well, yeah, in the projects, yeah. Alameda, there for a while, I guess would have been about 50 years ago, was essentially a suburb of Oakland. But I did spend a few months raised with a racist grandfather in my early teens, and I know, having been exposed to that, it just baffled me what he was trying to put forth. I mean, racism has to be taught. It's not innate. We've got to get that across. And if I were bold enough to be a guest host of your show for an hour, that's what I would cover, is that wasted human capital that neither side is benefiting from. When I was looking at the textbooks when I was a kid, we talked about the melting pot and hybrid vigor. And Tom, I have never met an intelligent racist.
Yeah, or at least an intelligent person who proclaims their racism. I don't disagree with that, although I suppose we have to define intelligence. But the thing that I find most interesting, Chaz, in this whole thing, and to what Michael was saying, the last caller, is about millennials, is that the millennial generation, and arguably Generation X and Y before them, but not the boomers, not my generation, I think was the first generation that grew up in the history of this country where the media was not explicitly promoting racist tropes. Now, it was continuing to have, essentially racial barriers. Most programming was all about white people. It was filled with white people. It was, all that kind of thing. But the negative stereotypes of black people, Hispanic people, were largely purged from television anyway, and out of the movies, within just the last 20 years or so. I mean, I remember this stuff growing up, the old cartoons when I was 5 years old in 1956, sitting watching TV at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. and the cartoons of you know, minstrel-like black people and not speaking clearly and all those kind of things. You know, this generation, these recent generations, were not exposed to that. They didn't have that embedded into their brains.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. As president of my kids' PTO, I'd go during the day, and I would see these kids are working along together beautifully. Nobody has taught them to hate yet.
Yeah, and it's like we were teaching that for years and years, and the thing that concerns me is that I see this. I mean, you see this all over the place among people, you know, let's say 40 plus, over 40 years old. But then you look at that video from Charlottesville, and most of those people marching were in their 20s and 30s. And those white people marching saying, "You will not replace us, Jews will not replace us." And where the hell did they learn that stuff? I mean, the recruiting is getting, these guys are aggressive. They're recruiting in police departments, they're recruiting in the military, they're recruiting, you know, on street corners, they're everywhere, and they're not lacking resources to do it.
They've got their faces, Tom. We've got Heather Heyer.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well said, Chaz, the martyr to the cause. Chaz, thank you for the call. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Hey, let's check in with Talk Media News Service and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us, the author of Sideswiped, a brilliant book that tells how Washington, D.C. really works, not to mention an extraordinary story of his life. Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Pleasure to be back.
So what's at the top of your list for what's in the news today?
Well, all kinds of things. Of course, we, across the country now, Talk Media News Service has been talking about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, being Dr. Martin Luther King, his birthday, and all that he did. And, of course, the discussion goes on and on and on, but his legacy cannot be ignored. Wonderful man. We put some of his quotes up today, so that's the first on our agenda. Especially in the sensitivity of today, which we'll get to in a second, of course, for the comments that were made that we all now are aware of. But I did want to switch to Hawaii. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to Ellen Ratner. She was out in Hawaii.
Yeah, I have not, and you know, but I'm guessing you have. What did she tell you?
Well, I called her, and the first thing I asked, and I think you'll appreciate this knowing Ellen, I said, "What was the first thing in your mind?" And Ellen said, "I thought, okay, I'm leaving the planet."
Yeah.
Very calmly is what she said.
Yeah.
And she happened to be outside with Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi. His nieces were out there in Hawaii, and she happened to be talking to them in some neighborhood. She said it was quite calm, you know, where she was at. People were wondering. Within 15 minutes, a policeman came by and said, "Look, I don't think this is
real.
You know, that this is real." But she said in other parts that she had talked to people, and there was a lot of obvious hysteria, bad, you know, feeling horrible, people crying, calling their loved ones. So, you know, it was a very bad, traumatic scene, obviously, in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And on a bigger picture, Tom, I think that we really missed the boat in this country because, you know, if you go back to the weapons of mass destruction, the clowns or idiots, I call them, that sat there on the floor of the House and told us this and that, and these were the high security people that are supposed to be proficient in their jobs, right? And it wasn't true. And you look at our history here, and the more we have tried to do things, you know, with the Patriot Act and surveillance, et cetera, the more it seems, honestly, that it just doesn't work right. And this is another example of, you know, being able to actually, one person can push one button, and this happens. So obviously our systems need to be looked at how they actually operate, because if this were real now occurring, will people really take it, you know, seriously?
Yeah. Well, and beyond that, there's a meta story to this, Bob, that I've not heard anybody discuss in any media, but I think that all Americans need to think about. Venkata Kararam Veliapandi, if I'm saying his name right, tweeted, "People of the US of A just got a taste of what their government," I believe he's Indian, "of what their government has been doing to Afghanistan, Syria, and all war-torn countries in the Middle East in just the past few years." So if you take that 38 minutes of terror that people in Hawaii experienced, and if you live in Afghanistan, if you live in Iraq, if you live in Syria, if you live in Libya, if you live in South Sudan, I mean, there's a half a dozen other countries, but, well, take Sudan out of that list, but all those other countries, American bombs are raining down constantly. And the children of those countries, you know, the terror, we're, oh my God, the poor people of Hawaii, 38 minutes of terror. These people have been living with terror ever since George W. Bush decided to lie us into these damn wars. Excuse me, Bob.
Oh, no, that's why I raised the issue. It's something that irritates me every single time I think of it. I raise the issue of why has no one tracked down the people that stood before all of us on that floor of the House in the private meeting, telling us this. I'm not even allowed to repeat what they told us, but telling us all of this information that led to the giving of President Bush full force and authority. And, you know, that was all done with super intelligence, the best minds of the intelligence community. Believe us, trust us, you know, is what we were told, basically.
Yeah, you were in Congress then.
And I was in Congress, and weapons of mass destruction, and they didn't happen. So either these people were the most incompetent lunatics we've seen, or they simply lied for the, you know, creation of war and machinery and sales and money.
And politics.
You know, and nobody tracked it down.
Well, and George Bush in '99 told his biographer if he ever became president, he wouldn't make the mistake his father did of, you know, invading Iraq and only being there 3 days. He would have a longer war that would gain him enough political capital to privatize Social Security. And sure enough, he had the war, and the first thing he did after 2005, after the re-election, was say, I'm going to use my political capital now to privatize Social Security. But anyway, it's we digress.
In the Hawaii thing, citizens have this feeling in America that, oh, yes, people are being, the right people are being watched to prevent certain things. Our technology is up to date. We're high-tech. You know, and that everything that comes out is accurate, and it simply isn't. And this is just one more example of it. I think the weapons of mass destruction were the worst. And of course, the issue of he said, and against he said. Two senators weighing in one way, but Lindsey Graham, I think, weighing in obviously for Senator Durbin gave a lot of credibility. It's not, you know, Senator Durbin standing against the other two. And now the White House is basically saying that he used, as you know by now, another word, adding house at the end of it.
Right. Does it matter? I mean, does it matter?
I know. I know.
Yeah. Anyhow, what else is going on in the world, Bob?
Well, I wanted to mention net neutrality because certain states, there's about maybe 7 of them now, that are attempting to craft bills. Now, I don't know how they're going to do it, to tell you the truth right now, because of federal net neutrality, but they're attempting to craft bills that will try to restore via the states net neutrality. Again, I don't know how you do that with the internet, but they are attempting in some states to do that.
Right. And some communities now are trying to do what Chattanooga did, you know, citywide broadband. There was a meeting here in Portland yesterday. I didn't get to go to it. I had other commitments, but you know,
interesting.
Yeah, some cities are saying, okay, we're gonna take this on for ourselves.
You can get around the Fed.
There you go. Congressman Bob Ney.
Thank you.
With Talk Media News. Bob, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you.
And we'll be back. And just a reminder, if you're in Wisconsin, Iowa, or South Carolina, there are elections tomorrow. We'll talk about that. And, well, actually, we have a guest at the top of the next hour, so stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2,
Natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home, a temple to the new India, or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story-high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle-down hadn't worked. But gush-up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And having lost my one sheet, there we go. What a crazy day it is. Not a crazy day. It's actually a beautiful day in many ways. Wayne Pacelle is with us. He is the president and CEO of the Humane Society of the United States. HumaneSociety.org is the website. Wayne, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be with you.
So happy to have you with us. The Trump administration is blowing up the organic rules. Tell me about this.
Yes, well, many of your listeners are familiar with the organic seal. If you go into a supermarket, or other food retail place, and you see an organic label from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, it actually guarantees you that the produce or the animal products that you're purchasing have certain standards that farmers adhere to. So one of the things that we commonly associate is that the products don't have pesticides on them, or that beef or pork doesn't have antibiotics or hormones given to the animals in the production process. So that label, and the original definition dates back to around 1990, after the Congress passed the statute essentially creating the organic label. USDA went through a pretty extensive rulemaking process to define the terms. Organic farmers were talked to throughout the process. Consumers were talked to. So that's been in place for quite a while, so nearly 3 decades. Early in that process, there was an acknowledgement that there needed to be a second wave of examination of the definition, because essentially when it came to animal welfare, even though that was part of the original statute that said organic had to mean that the animals were well cared for and well treated, the only standard was basically a nebulous standard that the animals have to have some access to the outdoors, didn't define it. So after about 15 years of action on this issue, last January, exactly a year ago, just before the Obama administration turned over the keys to the Trump administration, they made final a rulemaking process to upgrade the definitions for organically grown animal products, so eggs, pork, beef, chicken. and other animal products. And those standards basically said that the animals have to have access to the outside. They can't be so severely confined that they can't turn around. They can't be subjected to routine mutilations like cutting off their tails or clipping off the end of their beak. So the USDA actually made the rule final. We were ecstatic. Tens of thousands of organic farmers across the country were ecstatic because they want to do the right thing on the ground.
Right, and many of them are small farmers, but you've got these very large factory farms that are, you know, the polar opposite of organic, who really don't like this. Have they been greasing the palms of this administration? Is that what's going on?
Well, I think two things are going on. One is some of the large farmers are actually using the organic label, but they're not adhering to any reasonable standard that any consumer would recognize as organic. That
really?
They're in some big industrial, warehouse, and they've got a screened-in porch where the animals can look outside, but they can't get outside, and that somehow qualifies as organic for eggs. So that's one element, that there are people who are trading on the organic label, but they're not adhering to any reasonable common sense standard. Second, a lot of these big factory farms don't like the fact that, organic means something more, that somehow, their conventional production systems, supposedly aren't up to snuff because now we have this organic standard and the animals can turn around, and they think, well, the heck with the animals. They don't need to turn around. It doesn't matter. You're just engaging in hocus pocus. So the combination of those things, immediately when the new USDA people took over, they started to subvert the rule, and now they want to entirely repeal it.
So what can Americans do? What can our listeners and viewers do who would like to encourage our government to support the organic rule as opposed to the Trump administration? And I'm guessing probably a lot of Republicans in Congress who want to blow it up.
Yeah, there are a number of people who want to blow it up because they are obedient to big agriculture. They basically have tried to have no standards in agriculture. You go on to one of these factory farms with pigs jammed into cages they can't turn around, or laying hens who are producing eggs are in a warehouse with 150,000 birds. 6 or 8 birds are jammed into a cage the size of a bread box. And, that is the modern circumstance for billions of animals on factory farms right now. And the organic standards were the first time in federal law that we would enshrine any animal welfare standards. Big Ag has prevented any federal statute from being enacted to require minimum standards of care for animals on the farm. The only federal law related to farm animals of any consequence is the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, which excludes poultry, chickens and turkeys, who represent 95% of all animals raised. But if it's pigs or it's cattle, they're supposed to be rendered insensible to pain prior to being killed. So that means, they're stunned before they're actually killed. At least that's a standard, but they have fought any animal welfare standards on the farm, which is where the animals spend 99% of their lives. Slaughter is just the final few minutes of their life. But if they're on the farm for 6 weeks or for 6 months or for 2 years, they should be treated humanely. This was the first attempt to have, for a subset of the animals in animal agriculture, to have some decent standard of care, and now Big Ag. And
we're talking with Wayne Pacelle, the president and CEO of the Humane Society of the United States. What can individuals, what can I do? What can somebody listening right now? Is this a matter of call your congressperson? Is this a matter of call your senators? Is this a matter of leave a comment on the White House line? Does the USDA take feedback? Obviously, I would say go to humanesociety.org for more information and support the Humane Society. You guys are on this issue, but what else can we do?
Great. Thank you for asking again, since I didn't answer you the first time. First thing to do is go to my blog. It's called A Humane Nation. I've got a form. It's a hot link on the end of my blog that describes the issue, and people can comment to the USDA, which has opened up a comment period before they take final action. Now, they've already signaled that they want to scuttle the rule, but let's show them with tens of thousands of Americans that we don't like their action. Second thing is absolutely contact your lawmakers in Congress, your 2 senators, your U.S. rep, and say that you want the organic label to mean something, and you don't want it to be dumbed down so that factory farmers can sell products at organic level prices, but to short-circuit animal welfare. I mean, what's going on is a fraud. They're selling organically raised products at a higher price, but they're not adhering to the standards.
Right. Right. So that's great stuff. Wayne, thank you very much for being with us. How do people find your blog real quick?
They can Google A Humane Nation, or they can go to humanesociety.org, and then it's down in the lower right-hand side of our homepage, A Humane Nation.
Great. Thank you so much. Wayne Pacelle, the president of the Humane Society, the president and CEO of the Humane Society of the United States, the website humanesociety.org. Great talking with you, Wayne. Just a quick reminder, we're just about to hit a break here, that there are 9, today, Martin Luther King Day, 9 current members of Congress who voted against creating a Martin Luther King Day. Orrin Hatch, Johnny Isakson, and John McCain in the Senate. And in the House of Representatives, Jim Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin, Hal Rogers of Kentucky, John Culberson of Texas, and Steve Scalise of Louisiana. All of them, of course, Republicans. We'll be back. Check out humanesociety.org for Wayne's work. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It is and I've got a couple of videos here of Donald Trump and interesting information on Chelsea Manning. So stick around. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. James in Lindale, Texas. Hey, James, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
I want to say I disagree with is it Rudy or Rodney from earlier? Mm-hmm. I disagree with him about. Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air. Let's before you disagree, let's restate what he said for somebody who might have just tuned in. What are you disagreeing with, James?
About how blacks are, and I agree with more what the lady was saying about it hasn't changed. I don't see anything that has happened. I just don't see where he's coming from in those terms. He's talking about black millionaires where? I mean, you're talking about athletes. You're talking about in entertainment. And even 90% of black athletes are broke in 7 years. So I don't think there's any real change. And it's either by hook or by crook that they lose all their money. But one way or another, there's no black internet millionaires. There's no billionaire off of Bitcoin or and stuff like that. There's no a Forbes guy out there who's black like that.
So the doors are still closed in your experience and in your mind.
Heck, man, it's shut because, like I say, again, especially with affirmative action, it was made for black people. Lyndon Baines Johnson said, he said in that speech whether he was at Morehouse or Howard University, that was for the descendants of slaves, black people. But now affirmative action, I've seen the guy on CNN where he's from India. He got affirmative action. Where did that come from? He lied about being black.
Wow.
The people who come from Africa over here can use affirmative action. That's not who it was made for.
Right.
It was made for the people of descendants of slaves.
Yep.
But everybody can get it now. White women can get it. Where's all this coming from? So I want to know where all these doors are opened up. I know a guy who's a master electrician, and he's a millionaire from a master electrician's point of view. Show me the same guy. Show me a black guy like that who has a master electrician and who's a millionaire. Please show me. And I'm not talking about because he has a company or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm talking about he's a guy by himself who just hires people when he wants to go out there and make money because he's a master electrician. And I don't think we have that in our community. And descendants of slaves are just losing every day and just aren't real. You're realizing it, but we're not standing up for it. Again, if they shut the government down, again, over DACA, for people who aren't even from here, we lost again. The black folks have lost again because nobody's talking about us for reparations or anything. But they damn sure are talking about DACA, and they're a little portion of the community, a little portion of America. Black folks make up a big portion of America, and we don't get nothing. So I don't know what Rodney's talking about or where he's been. And I told your screen caller, man, I would love to talk to him one-on-one on your show because he's missing it. I think he's missing a very big point of it all.
Well, I think you just made your point really well, James. And do you, in your experience, you're in Texas, and Texas is notoriously racist. You know, it's part of the South. I mean, it's one of the states that fought the end of slavery vigorously. Do you think that there's a regionality to this? Do you think it's better in some places than others? I mean, significantly, consequentially, or is this in your mind nationwide? We've got about 10 seconds here, real quick.
I say it's nationwide because, again, over the nation, if you even look at California, how many black folks are living in California anymore because they can't afford it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just easy. It's not. This isn't hard math. If you're living every day as a descendant of a slave, this ain't hard math.
Yeah.
It's just
yeah.
not.
So and that's a variation on gentrification. Yeah, I get what you're saying. James, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. I appreciate the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Hey, welcome back. We've got some video I want to share with you. I mentioned this. We've got one of Donald Trump and one of Chelsea Manning. And let's pull up the Donald Trump. Shall we start out with that one, Nate? Yeah, let's start with Donald Trump. Okay, you ready to go? Give you 1 second, okay. This is Donald Trump. This is, you know, if you ask a racist if they're a racist, unless they make their living being a racist, you know, the David Duke variety, they tend to say, no, I'm the least racist person you ever met. For example.
No, I'm not a racist. I am the least racist person you have ever interviewed. That I can tell you.
Right. Where have I heard that before? And this is real interesting. Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, who's a Democrat, and you know, I don't think he's a decent senator, but Chelsea Manning is going to give him a run for his money. This is a clip from Chelsea Manning.
I'm Chelsea Manning, and I approve this message.
We live in trying times. Times of fear. Of suppression. Of hate. We don't need more or better leaders. We need someone willing to fight. We need to stop asking them to give us our rights. They won't support us. They won't compromise. We need to stop expecting that our systems will somehow fix themselves. We need to actually take the reins of power from them. We need to challenge them at every level. We need to fix this. We don't need them anymore. We can do better. You're damn right we got this.
Chelsea Manning's ad for the U.S. Senate. It's fascinating. And keep in mind, I mean, the thing about Chelsea Manning that blows my mind in terms of coverage, I mean, she's an extraordinary human being. But the thing that blows my mind is the wrong phrase, that disappoints me tremendously about the media coverage of Chelsea Manning is they, you know, when they reference her, they say the woman who leaked or the person who leaked classified information. Instead of pointing out that what provoked her to do this was this cockpit video of American helicopter gunners laughing and cheering as they were using machine guns to slaughter civilians and a Reuters reporter in Iraq. It was a war crime. It was a massive war crime committed by the United States of America that she exposed, and she went to prison for 7 years for. So that's not an endorsement, but it's going to make for a very, 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 very interesting race. I have mentioned several times that there are elections coming up. The elections in Iowa, Wisconsin, and South Carolina. In Iowa, This is the State House District 6. If you are southeast of Sioux City along Highway 29 in Woodbury County, Rita DeJong is the Democratic candidate. And so if you're in Iowa, pay attention. If you're in South Carolina, State House District 99. These are local elections. These are state elections. Democratic candidate Cindy Boatwright is running for election in South Carolina in State House District 99. And there are two races in Wisconsin. The first is Patty Schachner, and that's for State Senate District 10. And the second is for State Assembly District 58, and that's that's Dennis Degenhard. And he's running in the Jackson, West Bend, Allenton area, northwest of Milwaukee. And Patty Schachner is running in the area of the District 10 that is northeast of Minneapolis. So if you're in Wisconsin, Iowa, or South Carolina, get ready. There are elections. Remarkable. Remarkable day. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hello. I'd like to tell you a little story about racism on Martin Luther King Day.
Okay.
It was before racism was even identified. My life was saved by a black doctor. And in those days, you didn't get preferences to get into medical school. This man was so smart that he went through and scored high. He saved my life. Mm-hmm. My mother took me to doctors, and they kept giving her phenobarbital. In those days, that was a painkiller for a baby. Mm-hmm. She finally got an appointment with this Dr. Lunsford. He's dead now. That's why I didn't give you his name. Mm-hmm. And I only give you things you can fact check. His name was Dr. Lunsford. He practiced in Rochester. Mm-hmm. She took me to him. He took one look at me and said, "Get that boy to the hospital. He's got the mumps that went inside."
Oh.
If you know what mumps are, they go inside.
They swell up your lymph glands. I had mumps when I was a kid.
Yeah. And the white doctor, he just kept giving me phenobarbital and sending me home.
Whoa.
If it wasn't for that Dr. Lunsford, I'd been dead.
Okay. Great story, Corky. Thank you very much. Ellen in Hawaii. Hey, Ellen, what's on your mind? We have just a minute, Ellen, real quick. No Ellen? Apparently no Ellen. Let me just restate in the less than a minute that I have left here. These 9 members, this is from hillpress.org as we honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement today. It's worth remembering that the campaign to honor Dr. King faced significant opposition from Republicans. Ronald Reagan was among the primary opponents to the bill creating a holiday honoring Dr. King, as were former Vice President Dick Cheney, who was in Congress at the time. He was in the House of Representatives, and former Texas Congressman Ron Paul. Former Senator Jesse Helms famously led a vigorous campaign against the holiday on the grounds that King was a, quote, communist sympathizer. And apparently, these people agreed with them. Steve Scalise, John Culbertson, Hal Rogers, Jim Sensenbrenner, Johnny Isaacson, Orrin Hatch, and John McCain.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword, at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about
Oh, India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
.com/podcast. They're commercial free, and you can listen anytime, any place you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's pick up some phone calls here. Michael in the Bronx, or it's no longer the Bronx, it's Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
How you doing?
Good. What's up?
You know, I am just so upset with Mr. 45's comments recently. And
with who? Wait a second. Whose comments?
Mr. 45, I call him.
I see. Okay, yeah. Mr. Drumpf.
So, Mr. Trump, skunk, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. The whole thing stinks to high heaven. And the thing that really bothers me is that when you speak out on this, on Martin Luther King Day, a man that opposes the racism and all the principles that you spoke of already, when we call these people out, they got the audacity to say to us, oh, you got to get off the racism stuff. Remember Martin Luther King saying, look at the content of character, not skin color. But we're calling them out for their hurting us with skin color. And what the other thing is, they don't even think they're hurting law enforcement because, hello, we got law enforcement of color. How often have we heard of people of color in law enforcement jump by their very own, or one of the, help me here, there's a
by their colleagues?
In which a black man was jumped, and he's from a family of law enforcement by white civilians in an open carry state because they said they saw him with a gun. And then add to that, I have family in law enforcement. My cousin, who you probably just heard in Suffolk County, the first African American elected as sheriff. First African American sheriff. Yep. And a predominantly white place that has had their racism controversies in the past, did a complete 180 and elected this gentleman, who happens to be my cousin.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations, Michael. Just like, a majority white country elected Barack Obama as president of the United States twice.
Thank you.
And he is still the most respected politician in America.
So the main message to these white racists is not all people of color are so evil, demented, or so bad as Trump has put it. And likewise, not all law enforcement is white. So a message to the racist right-wingers, get a freaking grip on reality and get off the reality TV.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much. Terry in Chicago. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Real quickly, on the same subject, we elected a black mayor, Harold Washington, and we had the city council, however, had 50 members, and 26 of them were old white men, and they completely voted this guy down whenever he couldn't do anything. And then we elected in 26th Ward Alderman Louis Gutierrez, who is not going to run for re-election in Congress. We're all wondering what he's up to.
Yeah.
It was kind of exciting. It was a very politically fun thing to do. Then all of a sudden, Harold Washington had 26 votes, and he could actually do something.
Yeah.
But for like a whole year there, he couldn't. He was helpless, like Obama with the Congress.
Very, very interesting, Terry.
Right, that's just my thought for the day.
Okay, thanks for the nuance on Chicago politics there. I was unfamiliar with it. Tyrone in Denver. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to correct you on something that you said just a few minutes ago.
Please.
You mentioned Barack Obama being elected president of a most predominantly white country.
Yeah.
Barack Obama never carried the white vote in either election.
You're right.
He got 43% of the white vote in 2008 and around 38% in 2012. For up to white people, John McCain would have been president. For up to white people, Mitt Romney would have been president.
Yeah, it's an important point to make, Tyrone. Thank you for clarifying. And you're absolutely right. And in fact, I was going to say the last election, but that didn't have to do with race. But It had to do with politics. You know, Hillary Clinton, excuse me, Donald Trump carried 53% of the white female vote in the United States. I don't remember the percentage for white males, but it was higher than that. And good point, Tyrone. Thank you very much. Carmen in Philadelphia. Hey, Carmen, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How you doing today?
I am alive and kicking, Carmen. How about you?
Oh, goodness. Excuse me. My laptop. I don't know what's this strange music coming. I had to shut it down. Okay.
Quite all right.
Anyway, tell you something. When I was 11 or 12, Dr. King came through Philadelphia, through the neighborhood I grew up in.
Oh, my.
And, oh, yes, I didn't know anything about it until one of my neighbors knocked on the door and said, hey, come on, you guys. Dr. King is coming around the corner right now. So we ran outside, and I don't know how I made it. I think I'm the queen of getting through big crowds.
That's great.
I managed to shake his hand.
Wow.
And if you ever get a chance to go through Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, go to West Philadelphia, up around the area known as 40th and Lancaster. There is a plaque and a small memorial there commemorating that particular day. And across the street is a mural of that day when Dr. King gave a brief speech. And there was also, in this mural, I also remember some of the then people who were still alive who were black leaders, like Cecil B. Moore. And I never forgot that day, and it was one of the best days of my life. Number two.
Yep, go ahead.
I wish my grandmother was around the day Barack Obama was inaugurated the first time, because she told me since I was a child, someday a black man will be president of the United States. And she was right. And I cried. I think I cried for like an hour when watching the inauguration, because I was so overwhelmed and thought about those words that my grandmother told me. Number three, a couple of weeks ago you had a segment where you were asking people to, tell you what kind of nicknames, I guess you might say, that they had for the current so-called president. Mine is Trump, combination of his last name, Trump, and the word chump.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay.
Those are all good ones, Carmen. Thank you very much for the call. Justin in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Justin, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to X-Ray FM.
Hey, Tom, it's actually Jeff. Thanks so much for taking my call on this important day. And I'd like to use it, if I may, to put a spotlight on unions. Because as Joe Madison brought up earlier, Dr. King was killed in Memphis, giving his support to the striking sanitation workers there.
Right.
And as you always say, Tom, unions are democracy in the workplace. And in honor of Dr. King, I just want to spell that out a little further by saying, when someone's in a union, no matter what race they are, no matter their gender, religion, sexual orientation, et cetera, as a union worker, they're guaranteed equal pay, equal rights, and the same job protections as all their coworkers in the workplace. So whether we're talking about racism and civil rights or the Time's Up movement for women, we can't underestimate the importance of organized labor. And it's admittedly, as you like to point out, it's been under assault since Reagan, but it's still a vital force for many and potentially many, many more. So thank you, Tom, for being a champion for organized labor, and please keep spreading the word on it.
You got it. Thank you, Justin. Good to hear from you. Armin in Bradenton, Florida. Hey, Armin, what's on your mind today?
Remember countless times I told you on your program that I've been watching the Republicans scheme for the last 37 years since Reagan first got in, the tricklenomics scheme. And every time, go back and look in Congress, historically, in the last 37 years, every time the top 1% gets a capital gains cut or an income tax cut, every time, within months, usually a few months, the local, whether they're Democratic or Republican districts, governments, they always jack the property taxes up, the most regressive tax there is, to make up the difference.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing in Bradenton, Florida. They want to raise the property taxes 10%.
Whoa.
And my thing is, if this tricklenomics works, which it really doesn't, because you go back to 1980 when Reagan got in, we got a lot more people in poverty now. We got over $22 trillion in debt. And as you called out numerous times, when Reagan first got in, we were only, compared to today, $800 billion in the hole with our national debt. Now we're about 30 times that, mathematically. We got more people in poverty. The middle-class private sector is completely been devastated. The working middle-class private sector has been devastated and completely destroyed. We got more people in poverty. The $22 trillion, it's just sitting here and it's sitting there, waiting to be inflated with the Goldman Sachs gangsters. And the country is far worse off. Now the idiot is going to put 30,000 troops in Syria, in a sovereign nation, because they want to provoke a war, because he's hooked up with the neocons. Okay, they're protecting him from his blackmail and everything else that can be used against him. And they want war, they want military budgets, and the hell with everybody, the bottom 90%. Okay? You shut up, they'll take care of you. If you put up resistance, they'll cut you out economically. These people, 95% is not enough. They want it all.
Yeah, I agree.
Logical reason for their existence, and this country is completely run, in my opinion, by a shadow government of racketeers and international gangsters.
Got it, Armin. Thank you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Ellis and on the Big Island of Hawaii. Was that Ellis? Are you the person I was before calling Ellen? Did I get that wrong?
No, it's Ellis, and my pinky had touched the mute after 45 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so what's on your mind?
Okay. And interestingly enough, a short thing is that I tried to tell you yesterday about this commentary on. Right in the middle of that, the missile alert happened. So I put down the phone and hid with the dog.
Oh, my.
Anyways, this is about our name. So the person that was just speaking with you was talking about the 1%, but we really know that I'll call them the cabal, I'll call them the puppet masters, just for shorthand. It's really about 400 people in a much smaller number of families that are controlling things. And when we resort to against behavior, this is what they're trying to, want us to argue with each other. So when we call someone racist, we make the person bad, and of course they're going to push back, just like we do when someone calls us something that we don't self-identify as.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, it's just like we do with children in school, or changed with children in school. The child's not bad, but the behavior is bad. And when we become against, as opposed to, because the Democrats, we're supposed to be inclusive. This is everybody, every person. This is who we want to include. Everybody has a voice.
Aren't we sort of circling around the definition of evil here, Ellis?
The definition of evil, well, frankly, I don't actually believe in evil. I believe that behaviors.
So if somebody's behavior...
They come from being wounded as a child. A previous caller was talking about the training, but the children don't start.
I absolutely understand and agree with you on that. But Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, had a miserable childhood, but I doubt any of his victims really cared that much about his childhood.
I agree that behaviors need to be stopped and controlled. What I'm talking about is the language that we use when we want to fight against instead of fighting for.
Okay.
We fall into the divisiveness that the puppet masters want, that they use to control us through diverting us into 1,000 different ways of hating.
Keep people fighting against each other so they don't fight against us, says the ruling class. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. And they're doing a very good job of it. And I think that this is
doing a good job of
this is right at the core of Trump's race baiting.
Exactly. So if we fall into the same behavior, if we allow ourselves to become so frustrated.
But labeling Trump as a racist who's using racist language that's not calling names. That's identifying reality.
Well, but he says, I'm not a racist. But if we say that is racist behavior, you can't push back against that.
Well, yeah, and Jeffrey Dahmer was engaged in cannibalistic behavior, but he's not a cannibal.
No, I'm talking about, okay, but we're talking about how people react.
No, I understand, but I don't care how Trump reacts. Maybe
I care how other people react. So the other callers into your show, the regular people.
Okay. Ellis, we're hitting a break here. I'm sorry. Thank you for the call. Thoughtful analysis. Welcome back. The last 10 minutes of our program here. James in Chicago. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Yes, how you doing this evening, Tom?
Good.
I was calling. I was get into this discussion about the relationships and the condition of the country, and what I was bringing to the table was that I was someone that raised my kids in a mixed neighborhood, black and white and Spanish. I coached black, white, Spanish kids and even all types of kids. I coached them for years and things. And what I noticed about people that consider themselves not to be prejudiced, whether they're black or white, especially when the kids are young and things, they have a rule as far as like what's right and what's wrong. Now, and I've seen sometimes where parents would allow their kids to associate with kids of other colors that were not disciplined and had the boundaries that they would expect from their own race and group in order to prove a point, which is wrong when there's plenty of good blacks and plenty of good white children or people to associate with. And sometimes I've noticed how much they pick trying to prove a point, the people that are not up to their standards as far as right and wrong go in disciplines of the country. And I noticed when they get older, the separation with the powers to be begin to influence and change their mind, and they get developed because of their openness. They start forming opinions because of the experience they had with dealing with a negative person from a different race. Mm-hmm. And I also noticed that when blacks and whites get together, there's nothing they can not accomplish in the country. And the powers to be know that.
Well said.
And what they do is fight or begin to put all type of wedges in because they prey on nothing but disadvantaged whites, and they spend just as much money on disadvantaged whites trying to brainwash them as they do on money incarcerating blacks.
Yep. Yeah, I think. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But the thing that's never exposed is that because they have all the fathers fighting for the same job and the powers to be, when a man got to support his family, they put this separation or wedge in between the two to keep them going in opposite directions or against each other.
Yeah. And this is an old game plan. I mean, this is the Romans did this with every country they conquered. This is, get people to fight against each other so they don't fight against you. It's just
exactly. And when they teach the history, they're never they like to teach history as this group did this and this group did that. And there's nothing. You should be proud of your heritage, but in this American country that we live in, it should be the people did this, because when you look at the marches, no matter what they are, if you even look at the Spanish thing that's going on now with the DACA, they got all this headway going on now because they have decided to include the blacks in it. And it's funny how at times they change things and they include blacks in things to get a point across, and it's probably going to change the legislation.
Well, I don't think this was a selective thing, James. I mean, it's just there are some people who were brought to this country as children from, most of them were brought to this country as children from Mexico and South American countries, but some of them were brought to this country as children by people from various African countries. That,
exactly.
Why shouldn't they be eligible too? They didn't realize they weren't Americans. I mean, they grew up speaking American English. They grew up, No,
that's all. The only thing they know is America.
Right. So why shouldn't they be part of DACA?
Just because the only thing you know is one thing or the other doesn't mean that it's right in the sense that if you have a poor disadvantaged, back to the poor disadvantaged black kid that's been here, or the poor disadvantaged white kid that's been here, that haven't had a proper discussion on them as to what they should be entitled to.
James, a question.
Not to say that I don't love, all children, but it's just...
No, I get that. James, let me ask you... Excuse me for kind of jumping forward here, but we only have a minute and a half left in the show, and I have a question for you. You're the second or third person who I believe is African American who's called into the program and basically kind of put down the DACA program. I'm not exactly putting down the DACA program. But what I am saying is that when you have people in line, you don't let someone cut into the middle of the line. When you have an organized line that's been set. Well, here's my question,
now,
James.
Everybody in line, they want the same thing.
Here's my question.
Privileges.
If the sales pitch from the Republicans to people of color has been, don't go with DACA because they're going to compete with you for jobs, for example. Then do you think that the Democrats embracing DACA are going to lose support within the black, among some black voters, let's say, as a consequence of that?
If you go through a poor black neighborhood or you go through a poor white neighborhood and you see the couple of stores that's in either one of those neighborhoods, and then you go to a poor Spanish neighborhood and you look at the stores in the poor Spanish neighborhood, you'll see a difference in the poor black neighborhood and the poor white neighborhood and the poor Spanish neighborhood as to the smaller stores, who's running them. And they give you an idea of the balance of who cares about who in the whole picture thing.
So the answer to my question is, sounds like yes.
And they march for themselves. Some people care about everybody, and they marches for everybody.
Yeah.
It's not good for you just to march when you have a problem with your own alone.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. James, we're hitting the end of the show here. James, thank you. It's it's an interesting conversation, and one politically fraught conversation, particularly if the government gets shut down over DACA, and the Democrats get blamed for it. This is fascinating. Anyhow, I hope the rest of Martin Luther King Day is a great one for you. Please reflect on on all of these issues. And consider that, we need to be doing this work, right? Democracy doesn't happen all by itself. It's not a spectator sport. It requires you and me and all of our friends. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.